Alright, guys and girls, this is Jerningham here. If you live in Telford and Shropshire, apparently they're in Tier 2 at the moment, but after midnight tonight they'll be in Tier 3. If you live in Stoke-on-Trent, I presume they're going into Tier 4, or they could be still in Tier 3, who knows. But as we know so far, London's in Tier 4, Wales is in Tier 4, many other places could Scotland and Ireland go into Tier 4, or already they've been thinking about it. But anyway, we're going to be talking about the things in Shropshire, what Shropshire's of this I said on here anyway, so just in case you guys don't understand what I'm saying, or guys and girls don't know what I'm talking about. We're going to be watching. Apparently, we made a Brexit deal for the UK. Boris Johnson, as you can see here, he's made a deal with the European Union. So we're going to be looking at the tiers in the UK, what restrictions are where. If that makes any sense.
Resounding vote from MPs. And we'll take a look at tomorrow's front pages. That's in the press preview at 10:30. Good evening. A day that started with new hope that the end of the pandemic could be in sight, ended this evening with a warning that the virus is surging and the nation is facing a critical moment. That was the assessment of the Prime Minister as he confirmed an extra 20 million people will be put into Tier 4 restrictions from midnight tonight, and thousands of schools will stay closed at the end of the Christmas break. A new vaccine has been approved for use and will be rolled out from next week. But with COVID deaths rising fast, Boris Johnson insisted we must take firm action now. Well, the Midlands, the North East, parts of the North West and parts of the South West of England will go into Tier 4 from midnight tonight. That means hospitality, leisure and personal care services such as hairdressers must close, and people are also urged to stay at home. More areas, including Shropshire, Rutland, Cornwall and North Yorkshire, will move into Tier 3, and that means that no areas are now in Tier 2 and only the Isles of Scilly remain in Tier 1. Alex Rossi has tonight's first report.
The new variant of coronavirus is spreading through communities at an alarming rate, and even more of the population has been plunged into Tier 4. Nearly 3/4 will now be living under the toughest restrictions, and almost all of the rest of the country is under Tier 3. The Prime Minister spelt out the danger the nation is facing. The latest data is depressing. Deaths and infection rates all moving at speed in the wrong direction.
We've seen a 40% increase in cases in England in the last week alone, almost 15% more patients in hospital, more than at the peak of the first wave. And yesterday, sadly, we recorded almost 1,000 deaths across the UK for the first time since April.
The vaccine may be offering a ray of light, but for many businesses, there is no post-Christmas glow. Watching the latest announcement carefully, the immediate future looks bleak.
It's disappointing from our business sense, but we need to have a look to see whether we can do any sort of click and collect and whether that's worth doing. But yeah, our doors will close to the public as of tonight.
There is a warning too that the rising rates don't reflect any increased transmission due to Christmas socialising. January is looking grim. Bristol has remained in Tier 3 for now, but in this market the traders don't expect it to last. But it's the not knowing that makes it worse.
One would feel if some of these tighter restrictions had been implemented earlier, then we wouldn't be on this roller coaster going up and down all the time. But unfortunately, it hasn't been that way.
The transition has just made it really confusing because people just don't know what they're doing, especially obviously a trader like myself. We don't know whether obviously to order our stock.
And Tier 4, according to many scientists, may not even be enough to contain the spread. Only even stricter measures will do.
There was an inevitability, wasn't there, that with the infection rate soaring, many areas of the country would find themselves locked under even higher tier restrictions. But one wonders, with the virus still rampant, how many levers left does the government have to pull?
Hartlepool now finds itself, along with the rest of the North East, in Tier 4. Here there is concern about the government's strategy.
In certain places within the Tees Valley, you'll only need to move a couple of miles across the border and you're into a Tier 3 in North Yorkshire. And so it just doesn't work. We need a national solution.
Despite the tier system, Public Health England says it is continuing to see unprecedented levels of COVID-19 in many places. It's left many wondering how much longer then before a full national lockdown and a blanket of even tighter restrictions envelops the country. Alex Rossi, Sky News, Bristol.
Well,
Well, secondary school students had been warned that their return to the classroom could well be delayed because of rising infection rates. The Education Secretary, Gavin Williamson, confirmed that today, but he went further than expected. Nearly 1 million primary school pupils in London and the South East will now be taught remotely until at least the middle of January. Tom Parmenter reports.
Next week, Izzy should be walking up these steps and through these doors. But yet again, her college lessons will all be online.
I think the biggest frustration is just having to be the little person and watch all the big people what it seems like just pants about and do as much as they can, and they're not understanding because they're so out of touch that we're the ones being affected by this.
The government wants schools and colleges open, but the virus is forcing their hand. So the term dates for colleges and secondary schools in England have slipped.
All pupils in exam years are to return during the week beginning the 11th of January, with all secondary school and college students returning full-time on the 18th of January.
On primary schools, he said this.
Overwhelming majority of primary schools will open as planned on Monday.
But that leaves 49 areas in London and the southeast of England where primary schools will move to remote learning. They'll stay open just for vulnerable pupils or the children of key workers.
We've all got to reorganise our working lives and our home lives to accommodate it, and it doesn't just happen overnight, although it has to.
The kind of testing we saw in Liverpool
Yeah,
will be rolled out to schools from next week. But soldiers will primarily be offering online support, not boots on the ground yet.
It's really very problematic. It's very logistically challenging. And of course, we're educationists. We're not people who run public health testing.
The teaching staff at South and City College in Birmingham know that for many young people in deprived areas, remote learning still doesn't work, despite the promises of more tablets and laptops from the government.
Lots of people haven't got Wi-Fi, they haven't got internet, they haven't got laptops.
May go 100% online. I think for some students it's going to be awful, and I really do think it's going to have a major impact on their exams.
But with rising community infections in so many areas, this isn't normal.
More and more school leaders are arguing that part of that plan should be prioritising vaccinations for teachers to enable them to teach with confidence in the classroom as they normally would.
Talking Zoom.
Also, to salvage this academic
Coronavirus outbreak, West London.
January's disrupted
as
lesson
well.
plan could well
London
change
clubs.
again. Until there are vaccines for everyone, testing will be the thing that schools will have to rely on. Tom Parmenter, Sky News, Birmingham.
Well, our political correspondent Tom Rayner joins us now live from Downing Street. And Tom, the Prime Minister has always said that keeping schools open is a national priority. How significant do you think today's announcement was?
Well, it's politically significant because the government was so determined not to do this. As you say, Boris Johnson has set his stall on keeping schools open repeatedly, and there have been meetings all week after pressure from teaching unions on the government to close schools so there could be an assessment of the potential new risk posed by the new COVID variant. But it's also highly significant for hundreds of thousands of families around this country. All secondary school students will be impacted by this. Their families will be impacted by this. And a significant number of primary school pupils will also be impacted by this, particularly in London and the South East. And it's caused a great deal of confusion. When Gavin Williamson set it out, as you heard in that report, he said that the overwhelming majority of primary schools would remain open and only a small number of areas would be required to switch to remote learning. Now, while that might be true, Labour say it is a misrepresentation of the situation and shows that the government is not considering the needs of working parents. But even in London, Sophie, think about the situation. You have a number of councils going into this situation where primary schools are closed, and yet some neighbouring boroughs where that is not the case. One of those, the London Borough of Greenwich is their council leader there is saying he's deeply concerned about the fact that his council will not be required to close. So on the one hand, you'll have parents working out what their arrangements will be. On the other, you'll have parents wondering whether they should send their children to schools if they are in a Tier 4 area, but the schools are staying open.
Yeah, pretty difficult time for parents. And of course, this coming just days before the beginning of term. Tom, thank you very much. Some pretty grim statistics to bring you now. The number of people who have died from COVID-19 within 28 days of a positive test in the last 24 hours is 981. That's the highest number since April the 24th. And it brings the total number of deaths since the beginning of the pandemic to 82,624. There were also 50,023 new cases today. Well, after a day which delivered news of rising deaths, just mentioned tougher restrictions, closed classrooms for many, there was at least some good news in the Prime Minister's address to the nation this afternoon. Boris Johnson said he would move heaven and earth to roll out the newly approved Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine from next Monday, with the hope that restrictions can, in his words, recede into the past by spring. But the data showing exactly how effective the jab is yet to be published, as Sky's science correspondent Thomas Moore now reports.
The Oxford vaccine is the light in the gloom, now approved by the medical authorities and championed by the Health Secretary.
There's a route out of this, and the vaccine provides that route out. We've just all got to hold on over the weeks to come, so until the vaccine can make us all safe.
The vaccine will bring freedom for Elise and her family. She's got a weakened immune system. Her partner needs a kidney transplant, and they barely left the house in 10 months. But with 100 million doses of the vaccine being rolled out from Monday, they hope to get their jabs soon.
I'm really looking forward to it. Just getting that invitation is like, please come in for the jab, and I'll be there like a shark. I really will. It's there. I can see it. There's a glimmer of hope.
In the hope of protecting as many as possible against the surging new variant of the virus, people will initially be given just one dose. The medical regulator believes that would still be 70% effective, but hasn't published the evidence.
How much confidence can people have that this has been a truly robust and transparent process?
The public, everyone who's listening, can be absolutely confident that the rigour, the scientific rigour of our assessment has been as we would normally do according to guidelines and standards. So those standards have been met, and it has been a thoroughly robust process on safety, on quality, and on effectiveness.
The exact effectiveness of the Oxford vaccine
a lot of
is still
vaccines out.
unclear. Published data from clinical trials showed it was 62% when 2 standard doses were given 1 month apart. But analysis of a smaller subgroup of volunteers hinted that the effectiveness increased to 90% when the strength of the first dose was halved. That strategy has now been dismissed because evidence was lacking. Instead, the medical regulators have done their own data crunching that suggests giving 1 dose was 70% effective 22 days later, and that increased to up to 80% when a booster dose was given 12 weeks later. Whether that's all infections or just those needing hospital care isn't clear, and no head-to-head comparison has yet been made with the Pfizer jab.
We've always said that we're going to need multiple vaccines to control this pandemic, because in order to vaccinate everybody around the world, no one vaccine manufacturer is going to be able to produce enough to do that. So we need multiple vaccines, and it's good to have vaccines of different types for use. The advantages of this vaccine is that it can be stored and transported at a higher temperature, and that's going to make distribution and use very much easier.
That's sweet music to care homes with vulnerable residents beyond the reach of the Pfizer vaccine and its need for ultra-cold temperatures. The Oxford jab will be easier for GPs and nurses to take from door to door. A 90-year-old Hannah Clark can't wait.
Dad couldn't. It's been a long time waiting for it. I only wish it was this afternoon. I'm a bit of a hugger. I like to hug people.
The NHS hopes to immunise 1 million people a week, but even that will be too slow to stop the virus in the short term. At least there is hope for a brighter spring. Thomas Moore, Sky News.
Of course, that vaccine can't come quickly enough because two local councils, Buckinghamshire and Essex, declared major incidents today, increasing concerns that the health service is being overwhelmed. Medics in London told Sky News that intensive care patients were already being sent to hospitals outside the capital, with some wards at 200% capacity. Sky's health correspondent Ashish Joshi reports.
A major incident declared here in Essex. This hospital, another struggling to cope with a winter wave, a surge that threatens to overwhelm the health service.
It's absolutely awful. I can't even explain what we're going through.
Senior nurse Laura Duffel witnessed the devastation in the spring as she worked through the first peak. This time, she told me, it's much worse.
Already at the point we were in March and April, and the patients are still coming. We've got wards and intensive care units that are now fully COVID. We've got less non-COVID wards than we have COVID wards. I think that we are still keeping patients safe, but to the detriment of ourselves. And I think that that's what I implore the government to do something to help us. We cannot sustain this.
Ambulances are stacking up outside hospitals that are at capacity. Patients being treated in the emergency vehicles that brought them.
There are parts of the country or parts of London that are already overwhelmed.
Frontline medics say the same thing. It's a healthcare system close to breaking point. Limited resources that will force doctors to make life and death decisions.
You have got situations in London where patients are being shipped out of hospitals to intensive care beds out of the London region because they don't have any more left in their hospitals. We've received today notification from some of our members that there are 200% capacity going on in the intensive care units. We have patients standing in corridors because there is nowhere for them to go.
It sounds to me like you are very soon going to have to make some very difficult choices.
We're talking about very difficult decisions, which we're not saying lightly to frighten people, but it's a reality. If you have a limited number of ventilated beds, you then have to decide who can either continue treatment, who can access the treatment, and what your criteria are.
On the day when the country's hopes are raised again with the announcement of a second vaccine, doctors on the front line are repeating their demands to be prioritised for inoculation.
Every single healthcare worker and social care worker working on the front line is provided with a vaccine as a matter of priority. Those staff members are only getting access to 5% of the vaccine doses in the UK at the moment. We have already lost the lives of 640 plus healthcare workers in the UK, and we cannot afford to lose more NHS staff to COVID-19.
This is not the first hospital to declare an emergency, but the warning from the front line is, as this winter wave tightens its grip, there will be more. Ashish Joshi, Sky News.
Well, our science correspondent Thomas Moore joins us now. One of the big questions, of course, with the vaccine is who gets it and in what order. Do you think there's rising calls for key workers, teachers, doctors having quicker access?
We have to divide up what job people are doing. If you're a teacher, I'm sure you feel in the front line because the people who are carrying the virus at highest rate are secondary or school children, and there will be concerns there. But at the moment, you will be in the second wave of vaccinations, along with people like judiciary workers, first responders and so on. If you're a doctor, you will be right up at the top because of your risk of spreading the virus through hospitals. And this is the ultimate thing. If you've got a vaccine that is in limited supply, how do you use it best? Do you do what is proven to work, and that's to prevent disease, or do you try to stop the virus spreading? And at the moment, that's uncertain. Look at the numbers. 9 out of 10 deaths are in the over 65s. Why wouldn't you try and give it to them first to make sure that not only do they survive, but they're not the people ending up in hospitals? At the moment, hospitals are overwhelmed with elderly people who could be saved with the vaccine.
Thank you, Thomas. Some pretty big decisions there. Thank you. Well, that story is featuring in tomorrow's newspapers already. This is the headline in the Financial Times. Virus surge paints grim picture, but jab is hailed as a game changer. And of course, we'll be having a first look at all the front pages. That's in our press preview tonight at 10:30 with Azadeh Moaveni and Harriet Sargent. They're both journalists and authors. Ireland's Prime Minister Micheál Martin has said the country must return to a full lockdown for at least a month. That's due to the rapid spread of the new strain of COVID-19. Non-essential retail has been closed and school holidays have been extended in a bid to curb a surge in the new strain of COVID-19 that is spreading faster than anticipated. A trade deal with the European Union was formally signed by the Prime Minister today. His message: we got Brexit done, let's keep Brexit done. MPs voted overwhelmingly in favour of the bill this afternoon by 521 votes to just 73. It comes into force tomorrow evening as the Brexit transition period ends, 4.5 years after the referendum. Sky's deputy political editor Sam Coates has this report.
Today marked the end of Brexit. Or did it?
The treaty that I've just signed is not the end. It is a new beginning, and I think the beginning of what will be a wonderful relationship between the UK and our friends and partners in the European Union. I'm delighted to welcome with us today.
It's not just the UK side talking of a new second special relationship. Everyone on the EU side now playing happy neighbours too. Heading not for a final Brexit showdown, the last 4.5 years have had enough of those, but to present a deal before Parliament which few had read and even fewer objected to.
The ayes to the right, 521. The noes to the left, 73. The ayes have it, unlock.
With both Labour and Tories supporting a deal, the result was never in doubt. An opposition that isn't actually opposing always helps.
This is a thin deal. It's got many flaws, but a thin deal is better than no deal. And not implementing this deal would mean immediate tariffs and quotas with the EU, which will push up prices and drive businesses to the wall. It will mean huge gaps in security, a free-for-all on workers' rights, environmental protections, and less stability for the Northern Ireland Protocol.
Another person who rolled out objections but then voted in favour is former Prime Minister Theresa May, who, perhaps unsurprisingly, preferred the deal that she did 2 years ago but then couldn't sell to her side or Labour.
I did listen with some incredulity to what the Leader of the Opposition said. He said he wanted a better deal. He had the opportunity in early 2019 when there was the opportunity of a better deal on the table and he voted against it. So I will take no lectures from the Leader of the Opposition.
She explained why she had big reservations.
One area where I am disappointed in the deal is in services. And the key area is financial services. We have a deal in trade which benefits the EU, but not a deal in services which would have benefited the UK.
The DUP, the most significant opponents to the deal, explain why.
Northern Ireland will still be subject to some EU laws made in Brussels. Those laws will be adjudicated by the European Court of Justice. There will be barriers to the internal trade within the United Kingdom.
With today's Commons vote, a Brexit deal is finally done. Buried impossibly far down the agenda because of the pandemic. But just how much appetite will there be to talk about UK-EU relations in future? And how much tolerance will there be for bumps in the road if they arise as soon as next week? Nobody knows what this will do yet. How businesses will interpret it, lawyers litigate it, how voters will view it. That's all for 2021. Sam Coates, Sky News.
The Premier League football match was called off just 3 hours before kick-off today because of the coronavirus outbreak at Fulham Football Club. It's the second cancellation in just a week and will intensify calls for a full 2-week
Coronavirus at football clubs, eh?
in top-flight football. Sky Sports correspondent Martha Cowner reports.
A deserted Tottenham Hotspur Stadium signifies a growing crisis for the Premier League. Their fixture against Fulham, another casualty of COVID-19. This was posted by Spurs manager Jose Mourinho as he waited for news just 4 hours before the intended kick-off time. Best league in the world, he wrote sardonically. This is the second game in a week called off in the top flight, with seemingly no contingency plan should the condition worsen. The Premier League's been testing players and staff at least weekly since the game resumed in June, and so far they've had a relatively low instance of positives compared to the general population. But that risk is growing, and it's borne out by
And
some are now calling for a permanent break from football for a period of weeks.
Can only do the right thing, which would be to have a circuit breaker.
Circuit breaker again.
And the last thing I want to do is catch COVID. So if that's what we need to do, that's what we need to do. I mean, probably all the players will overcome it. It'd be more difficult for me if I caught it.
After today's match, the Premier League has now had 3 games cancelled so far this season. 4 games were postponed in the Championship and 11 games in League 2. It's League 1 that's taken the biggest hit, 29 games in total, having to be called off. This was Peterborough United's last game on the 15th of December. They won't play
Microphone.
until January.
Microphone. Microphone. Let's get carried away.
If I were over 60, I definitely wouldn't be taking a job in football at the moment, not until I'm vaccinated in the next couple of months. So there's no point in me announcing, well, now we should have a circuit break and, stop for 2 weeks. Football's done this really well. I think they can continue to do it really well, and we can get over this bump into January and get the show back on the road.
Some clubs have been accused of slacking on COVID protocols. Rochdale's team doctor says his players are following the rules, but he's worried about the potential long-term risks to athletes' health, like heart problems.
It's not just you're going to get a cold and you'll be over it. There is the potential that they could, get these long COVID symptoms. So my feeling and my opinion is, I know football's entertaining, we all love it, it's the sport we love, but is it necessary at the moment in a pandemic?
We're used to seeing empty stands, but empty pitches are a new curse of COVID-19. Even the most carefully conceived bubbles can't keep the virus out. The question is, can football keep this show on the road? Martha Kellner, Sky News.
Well, there was at least one Premier League football match that went ahead today. Let's cross to Sky Sports News for an update from Alice.
Thank you, Sophie. Good evening. Liverpool are only 3 points clear of Manchester United at the top of the Premier League rather than 5 after being held to a goalless draw at Newcastle. Well, the home side had goalkeeper Carl Darlow to thank for keeping the champions out. A brilliant save there to deny Roberto Firmino is one of several he made. Liverpool failing to score in the Premier League for the first time this season. They've also won just once in their last 7 away league fixtures. Manchester City resumed training this afternoon after a number of positive coronavirus cases forced the closure of their facilities for deep cleaning. Well, the outbreak meant their game at Everton on Monday was postponed. A limited number of facilities are now back in use. It therefore looks increasingly likely their Premier League trip to Chelsea on Sunday will go ahead. Swansea had missed the chance to move to within 2 points of Championship leaders Norwich as they drew 0-0 with Reading. Brentford replaced them in second after their 2-1 win over fourth-place Bournemouth. Their winner from Tariq Fosu. Brentford are unbeaten in 15 league games. Rangers will go into Saturday's Old Firm derby against Celtic with a 16-point lead after both sides won their final games of the year. Steven Gerrard's Rangers beat St Mirren 2-0, Kemar Roofe putting them ahead before Alfredo Morelos exploited a defensive slip here to clinch the win. It's 13 league victories in a row for Rangers, who remain unbeaten after 21 games. Celtic defeated Dundee United 3-0 to stretch their unbeaten run in all competitions to 7 games. Ismail Assoro with a spectacular opener here. There were wins elsewhere for Ross County and Kilmarnock. St Johnstone and Hamilton drew 0-0. Premier League champion Glendoran is out of the World Championship after losing 4-3 to Dirk van Duijvenbode in the last 6
I'm not a fan for football now.
Former champion Gary Anderson is
Darts,
through to the
yeah.
quarter-finals though, following a straight sets win over Devin Peterson. Stephen Bunting, Darren Gurney, Gerwin Price and Dave Chisnell are also through to the last 8. There's reaction to Liverpool's draw at Newcastle on Sky Sports News. We're back at 11:20. See you then.
Well, they span the breadth of society, from sportsmen to scientists to community leaders. And the New Year's Honours List has just been released. It includes a knighthood for 7-time Formula One champion Lewis Hamilton and MBEs for Jimmy Greaves and Ron Flowers, both part of the 1966 World Cup squad. Well, this year, dozens of people who helped the nation deal with the challenges caused by the pandemic have also been recognised, as Ashna Hoenag reports.
If anyone deserves recognition this year, it's those behind the masks. Consultant Dr. Tamas Akmani led the critical care response in Wales during the pandemic. He did double time on the wards whilst helping find effective treatments for COVID-19. But like so many in his profession, humility is his virtue.
Being recognised for this with an MBE is fantastic, but this year is really a very contrasting one, and I will for sure reflect on what can be learned and what can we take forward, both from the difficulties and from the successes.
I'll be back in a minute, guys and girls. Just getting a drink of water.
Community spirit, perhaps best personified by Ravi Banot, MBE.
Yeah, I need some water. Oh, good.
After decades of volunteering work, he used his network to coordinate a community response to the pandemic, providing care parcels for the homeless and delivering meals to NHS staff and the vulnerable.
It's so heartwarming when you see people doing things that you never have seen them doing all these years. And I'm talking about people not just young, I'm talking about people who are old, and some people are really old, in their 80s, doing community work. Absolutely unbelievable.
This is the most ethnically diverse honours list yet. Oldham's youth mayor, Sana Kalik, is the youngest recipient.
I think the pandemic has really given us the opportunity to go out there and help people. You know, it's really opened our eyes to those who weren't opened before, as to like how much we are needed as young people to go out there and take an active role.
Ocean advocate and Sky Ocean Rescue Ambassador Emily Penn has also been recognised for her conservation work. Unsung heroes dominate the honours, but British icons are on the list too. After a year of racing records, Formula One world champion Sir Lewis Hamilton is awarded a knighthood, and one of Britain's much adored stars of stage and screen is honoured too. Now, Dame Sheila Hancock is reflecting not on her achievements, but on her struggling industry.
That kind of creativity is so vital in people's lives, particularly in a world where we're not going to have the work. I'm not going to go into the mill. I'm not going to go into the factory like our parents did. I'm hoping out of great suffering, very often, wonderful things come out, and I think people are ready for it.
In a year that has changed and challenged so many, the honours of today reflect the best in society, the ones who've pulled us through the very worst of times. Ashna Harinag, Sky News.
Well, that was News at 10. Coming up, we have the press preview, including this story on the front page of the Eye. Vaccines for all, that's the headline there. And tonight we'll be joined by Azadeh Moaveni and Harriet Sargent, both of whom are journalists and authors. That's all coming up in a few moments.
Well, I hope you all enjoyed that, guys and girls. Give it a like, give it a comment, share it with your friends. I'm going to upload this video to YouTube. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.